Ryan sat in the cold, sterile hospital waiting room, his fingers tapping anxiously against his knee. The bright fluorescent lights above him did nothing to calm his nerves. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind filled with worry. His wife, Emily, had been admitted to the hospital due to complications in her pregnancy. The doctors had assured him that she and the baby would be fine, but Ryan couldn't shake the fear that clung to him like a heavy fog. He ran a hand through his messy brown hair, exhausted yet unable to rest. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, and his body ached from sitting in the stiff hospital chair for hours. He had been by Emily's side all day, holding her hand and whispering reassurances to her. But now, as she rested in her hospital bed, he was forced to wait outside, helpless. As he stared blankly at the white hospital walls, lost in his thoughts, a gentle voice pulled him back to reality. "Ryan," the voice said softly. He turned his head to see Linda, his mother-in-law, standing beside him. Her face was filled with concern, her kind brown eyes studying him carefully. Despite the late hour, she looked composed, her short, graying hair neatly styled. She had always carried herself with grace, but tonight Ryan could see the exhaustion in her face too. She placed a warm hand on his shoulder. "You need to get some rest," she said gently. "You've been here for hours." Ryan shook his head. "I can't leave Emily," he said, his voice hoarse. Linda sighed, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know you want to be here for her, and that's admirable. But Ryan, you won't be able to help her if you're running on no sleep. She needs you to be strong." Ryan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I just don't want to leave her alone." "You won't," Linda reassured him. "I'll stay with her tonight. You go home and rest. You need it more than you think." Ryan hesitated, torn between his exhaustion and his need to be near Emily. He had been by her side throughout the entire pregnancy, attending every doctor's appointment, holding her hand when she felt sick, and listening to her excitedly talk about their future as parents. He had promised himself that he would be there for her every step of the way. Leaving her now, even for a few hours, felt like breaking that promise. Sensing his hesitation, Linda gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "I'll call you if anything happens, I promise," she said. "Emily is resting now. The best thing you can do for her is to take care of yourself." Ryan finally nodded, though he still felt guilty. He stood up, stretching his stiff limbs. "Okay," he said reluctantly, "but please call me if anything changes." "I will," Linda assured him with a small smile. Before leaving, Ryan stepped into Emily's hospital room. She lay in the bed, her face peaceful in sleep, her hands resting gently over her belly. Seeing her like this, so fragile yet strong, made his chest tighten with emotion. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "I love you," he whispered, though he knew she was asleep. Then, with one last glance at her, he left the hospital. The night air was cool as he walked to his car. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh air clear his mind. The drive home felt surreal. The streets were nearly empty, and the city lights blurred in his tired vision. When he finally pulled into the driveway of their small home, he sat in the car for a moment, staring at the darkened windows. The house felt different without Emily there. He stepped inside and was immediately met with silence. Usually, Emily would be there to greet him with a smile, or they would be curled up on the couch together, talking about baby names and nursery decorations. Now the emptiness was overwhelming. Ryan ran a hand over his face, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He knew he needed sleep, but the bed felt too big and too cold without Emily beside him. He lay down anyway, staring at the ceiling, his mind still racing with thoughts of his wife and unborn child. Just as he was about to drift into uneasy sleep, he heard the front door open. His heart jumped, and he quickly sat up. "Ryan." A familiar voice called out. It was Linda. He got up and walked toward the living room, surprised to see her standing there. "Linda, what are you doing here?" She smiled gently. "I thought you could use some company." Ryan felt a wave of relief. He didn't realize how much he needed someone to be there. "I appreciate it," he admitted. "It's just hard being home without Emily." Linda nodded in understanding. "I know, dear, but she needs you to stay strong." She walked into the kitchen and put on a pot of tea. As the warm scent filled the room, she sat across from Ryan at the small dining table. "You love her very much," she said softly. Ryan smiled, though his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "With all my heart." Ryan stepped into the house, shutting the door behind him with a tired sigh. The quiet was unsettling. It felt strange to be home without Emily. For months he had imagined them spending their last few weeks before the baby's arrival together, laughing, preparing the nursery, and dreaming about their future as parents. Now, instead of excitement, all he felt was worry. His feet dragged as he walked toward the living room. He sat on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples. He knew he should try to rest, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. What if something went wrong? What if Emily needed him and he wasn't there? As he sat lost in thought, he suddenly heard the front door open again. His heart jumped, and he quickly stood up. "Ryan?" A familiar voice called out. He turned to see Linda stepping inside, carrying a small bag in one hand. "Linda?" he asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She gave him a gentle smile as she set her bag down. "I thought you could use some company." Ryan let out a slow breath. He hadn't realized how much he needed that. The house had felt too empty, too lonely, and he didn't want to be alone with his thoughts. "I appreciate it," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "It's just hard being here without Emily." Linda nodded, her expression softening. "I understand. She's my daughter, and even though I've been through this before, it doesn't make it any easier. But you can't let the worry eat you up, Ryan. She's in good hands." He sighed, sitting back down on the couch. "I know. But I feel useless. I should be doing something." Linda sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You are doing something. You're here, worrying, caring, and waiting for her. That's what love looks like." Ryan looked at her, appreciating the warmth in her words. Linda had always been kind to him. From the moment he married Emily, she had treated him like her own son. Now more than ever, he was grateful for her presence. She glanced at him thoughtfully. "Have you eaten?" Ryan shook his head. "I wasn't hungry." Linda sighed. "That's not good. You need to keep up your strength for Emily and the baby. Come on, let me make you something." Ryan started to protest, but she was already heading to the kitchen. He followed her, watching as she moved around with ease, opening cabinets and pulling out ingredients. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I want to," Linda replied with a smile. "Besides, it gives me something to do. Sitting in a hospital all day doesn't make you feel very useful either." Ryan understood that feeling all too well. As Linda cooked, Ryan leaned against the counter, watching her. "You're handling this better than I am," he admitted. Linda let out a small chuckle. "Oh, I wouldn't say that. I just hide it better. When Emily was born, I was a mess. I remember sitting in the hospital, terrified that something would go wrong. And now here we are, years later, and I feel the same way all over again." Ryan gave a small smile. "At least you have experience. This is my first time going through something like this." Linda placed a plate in front of him. "You're doing fine, Ryan. More than fine. Emily is lucky to have you." Ryan took a bite of the food, realizing just how hungry he actually was. As they ate together, the tension in his chest slowly eased. "Tell me about Emily as a kid," Ryan said, wanting a distraction. Linda's face lit up with warmth. "Oh, she was a handful," she said with a laugh. "Stubborn, independent, and full of energy. When she was 5, she wanted a dog, but we told her no. So she tried to rescue a stray from the park and hid it in her closet. We only found out when we heard barking coming from her room." Ryan laughed. "That sounds exactly like her. She's always had a big heart," Linda continued. "Even as a teenager, she would always stand up for others, even when it got her into trouble. And when she met you, I saw something in her I hadn't seen before, this deep, steady happiness. I knew you were the right one for her." Ryan felt a lump in his throat. "I love her so much." Linda reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I know you do, and that's why she'll be okay." After dinner, they moved to the living room, sipping tea and continuing their conversation. Linda shared more stories about Emily's childhood, and Ryan found himself smiling, feeling comforted by the memories. As the night wore on, the weight of exhaustion finally settled over him. Linda noticed his drooping eyelids and patted his arm. "Go get some sleep, Ryan. I'll stay here in case you need anything." He hesitated but knew she was right. "Thank you, Linda, for everything." She smiled warmly. "That's what family is for." Ryan went to bed that night feeling lighter than he had in days. The worry was still there, but knowing he wasn't alone made it easier to bear. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains as Ryan slowly opened his eyes. For a moment he forgot where he was, expecting to see Emily beside him, but the empty space in the bed quickly reminded him that she was still in the hospital. A familiar wave of worry crept over him, but he pushed it down, reminding himself that she was in good hands. Dragging himself out of bed, he stretched his stiff limbs and ran a hand through his messy hair. The night before had been surprisingly comforting. Linda's presence had helped ease some of his tension. He had still worried about Emily, but having someone to talk to had made all the difference. As he stepped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, he was met with the warm, inviting smell of coffee and something cooking in the kitchen. He followed the scent and found Linda standing by the stove, flipping pancakes in a pan. The sight of her in their kitchen felt strangely natural, as if she had always been there. "Good morning," she greeted him with a gentle smile. "I hope you don't mind me taking over your kitchen." Ryan shook his head and let out a small chuckle. "Not at all. It actually smells amazing." "Good," she said, setting a fresh stack of pancakes on a plate. "Because you need to eat. You barely had anything yesterday." Ryan rubbed his eyes and sat down at the table. "I guess I just wasn't thinking about food much." Linda poured him a cup of coffee and placed the plate of pancakes in front of him. "I understand," she said, sitting across from him, "but you have to take care of yourself, Ryan. Emily will need you to be strong when she comes home." Ryan nodded, appreciating her concern. As he took a bite of the pancakes, he realized how hungry he actually was. The warm, fluffy texture melted in his mouth, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to enjoy something simple. "This is really good," he admitted. Linda smiled. "Emily always loved my pancakes. When she was little, she would insist on helping me make them, even though she mostly just made a mess." Ryan chuckled. "That sounds like her." As they ate, Linda continued sharing stories about Emily's childhood, how she used to run barefoot in the backyard, how she once tried to build a treehouse by herself, and how she always had a soft spot for animals. "She has such a big heart," Linda said, stirring her coffee. "She gets that from her father." Ryan looked at her curiously. "I don't think I ever asked, what was your husband like?" A fond expression crossed Linda's face. "James was a wonderful man, patient, kind, and always putting others before himself. He adored Emily, she was his little shadow growing up. Every Saturday morning they would go to the park together, just the two of them. And when he passed away, it was hard. But Emily stayed strong, even when I felt like falling apart." Ryan listened quietly, sensing the emotion in Linda's voice. "She's strong like you," he said softly. Linda smiled. "Maybe. But I see the same strength in you, Ryan. The way you love her, the way you've been by her side every step of the way, it reminds me of James. He would have liked you." Ryan felt a lump form in his throat. "That means a lot," he said sincerely. Linda reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Your family, Ryan, and family looks out for each other." After breakfast, Linda suggested they do something productive to take their minds off things. "How about we organize Emily's art room?" she suggested. "She loves that space, but I'm sure she left it a mess before going to the hospital." Ryan thought about it and nodded. "That's actually a great idea. She'll love coming home to a clean space." They spent the next few hours in Emily's art studio, sorting through paintbrushes, sketchbooks, and unfinished canvases. The room was filled with Emily's personality, bright colors, half-finished paintings leaning against the walls, and little notes she had written to herself. As they worked, Ryan felt a strange sense of peace. Instead of sitting around worrying, he was doing something for Emily, something that would make her happy when she returned. "She's so talented," Linda said, holding up a painting of a sunset. Ryan smiled. "Yeah, she really is. She always says painting helps her express emotions she can't put into words." Linda nodded. "That sounds like her." As they continued cleaning, they found an old notebook filled with Emily's sketches and ideas. Flipping through it, Ryan found a page where she had written a list of baby names. "Look at this," he said, showing Linda. She smiled. "She's been thinking about names for a long time, hasn't she?" Ryan chuckled. "Yeah, she keeps changing her mind though. One day she loves a name, and the next, she hates it." Linda laughed. "Sounds about right." For the first time since Emily had been hospitalized, Ryan felt a little lighter. The morning passed quicker than Ryan had expected. After cleaning up Emily's art room, he felt a little better, like he was doing something meaningful for her return. But as soon as he sat down to rest, the weight of worry settled back into his chest. Emily was still in the hospital, and no matter how many times he told himself she was in good hands, the anxiety wouldn't fade completely. Linda, who had been quietly observing him, seemed to sense this. She set down her coffee cup and gave him a knowing look. "You need to keep yourself busy, Ryan," she said. He sighed. "I know, I just don't know what else to do." Linda thought for a moment before her eyes lit up. "How about we tackle another project? Something to surprise Emily when she gets home." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She smiled. "The nursery." Ryan blinked, surprised. The nursery had been a work in progress for weeks. He and Emily had planned to finish it together, but between doctor's appointments and last-minute preparations, they had never gotten around to it. Now the thought of completing it for her felt right. "You really think we can finish it today?" he asked. Linda smirked. "With the two of us? Absolutely." Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Ryan led the way to the nursery. The room was half finished, with unopened boxes of furniture and baby decorations scattered around. The walls were already painted a soft sky blue, Emily's choice. She had always imagined a peaceful, calming space for their baby. Ryan picked up a box labeled crib inside. "I guess I should start with this." Linda chuckled. "Ah, yes. The famous crib assembly. This should be fun." Ryan gave her a skeptical look. "You've done this before." She laughed. "Many years ago, but yes. When Emily was born, James and I spent an entire afternoon arguing over how to put her crib together. It turned out we were reading the instructions upside down." Ryan couldn't help but smile. "That sounds like something I'd do." Together, they started assembling the crib, carefully following the instructions. Ryan worked on securing the frame while Linda handed him the necessary screws and tools. As they worked, they talked about Emily, about parenting, and about life. "You know," Linda said as she tightened a bolt, "Emily was always the kind of person who put others first. Even as a child, she would give away her toys to kids who didn't have any. I see that same quality in you." Ryan paused, touched by her words. "I just want to be the best husband and father I can be." Linda smiled warmly. "And that's exactly why you'll be great at it." They continued working, piece by piece, until the crib was finally complete. Ryan stepped back and admired their work. "Not bad for a couple of amateurs." Linda grinned. "I'd say we did pretty well." After a quick break, they moved on to setting up the rest of the room. They hung up soft curtains, arranged stuffed animals, and placed baby books on the small white shelves. Ryan unwrapped a mobile with little stars and clouds and carefully attached it above the crib. Linda watched as he adjusted it, her eyes filled with emotion. "Emily is going to love this." Ryan smiled, imagining Emily's reaction when she saw the completed nursery. "I hope so." They continued decorating, placing finishing touches on the room. Linda folded tiny baby clothes and organized them in the dresser, while Ryan set up a rocking chair near the window. As they worked, Ryan found himself feeling lighter. He wasn't just waiting anxiously anymore, he was doing something, preparing a space for their child. It made him feel connected to Emily, even though she wasn't there. After a few hours, they stepped back to admire their work. The nursery was finally complete, the soft blue walls, the cozy crib, the rocking chair. It was exactly how Emily had imagined it. Linda let out a satisfied sigh. "It's perfect." Ryan nodded, a sense of pride filling his chest. "Yeah, it really is." They stood in silence for a moment, taking it all in. Then Linda placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Emily is going to be so happy when she sees this. And your baby? They're going to love it here." Ryan felt a lump in his throat. "I just want everything to be okay." Linda squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "It will be, Ryan. You're doing everything right." At that moment, his phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart skipped a beat as he pulled it out, fearing the worst. But when he saw the message, his breath caught in his throat. "Emily, hey love. Feeling a little better today? I miss you." Ryan let out a shaky breath of relief. He quickly typed back. "Ryan, I miss you too. The nursery is finished. You're going to love it. Can't wait to bring you home." Linda watched as a smile spread across his face. "Good news?" Ryan nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "Yeah, she's feeling a little better." Linda exhaled in relief. "That's wonderful." As the sun began to set, Ryan found himself feeling lighter than he had in days. The nursery was finally finished, and Emily's message had lifted a huge weight off his shoulders. Knowing she was feeling better gave him hope that she would be home soon, but the waiting was still hard. Linda must have sensed his emotions because after dinner, she suggested they relax for a while. "Come on," she said, leading him toward the living room. "Let's take a break. You need it." Ryan hesitated. "I don't know, Linda. I feel like I should be doing something." She gave him a knowing look. "You have been doing something all day. You cleaned, built furniture, and prepared for Emily's return. Now you need to let yourself breathe. She wouldn't want you exhausting yourself." Ryan sighed, realizing she was right. He followed her to the couch, where she handed him a glass of wine. "One drink won't hurt," she said with a small smile. "It might help you relax a little." Ryan chuckled, taking the glass. "You really know how to take care of people, huh?" Linda shrugged. "It's a mother's instinct." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks. The house was peaceful, the soft hum of the evening settling around them. For the first time since Emily had gone to the hospital, Ryan felt a sense of calm. Linda glanced at him. "Tell me, Ryan, how are you really feeling?" Ryan exhaled slowly, setting his glass down. "Honestly, I'm scared." Linda nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I mean, I know Emily is strong, and the doctors say she's doing okay, but I can't help thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if something happens during the birth? What if I'm not ready to be a father?" Linda listened patiently before reaching for his hand. "Ryan, every father feels that way. Every mother too. When I was pregnant with Emily, I had those same fears. But you know what I learned?" Ryan looked at her expectantly. "You're never really ready. You just become ready. The moment you hold that baby in your arms, everything changes, and the fact that you're worried, it just means you care. That's what makes a great father." Ryan absorbed her words, feeling a small weight lift from his chest. "I just want to be the best I can be." Linda smiled warmly. "You already are." They sat quietly for a moment, the warmth of their conversation lingering in the air. Then, Linda chuckled softly. "You know, you remind me so much of James." Ryan tilted his head. "Really?" She nodded. "He was the same way, always overthinking, always worrying about being enough. But he had a heart full of love, just like you do." Ryan smiled. "I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you," she said with certainty. "And he would have been so happy to see the kind of man you've become." The room grew quiet again, but it was a comfortable silence, one filled with understanding. Linda sighed, leaning back into the couch. "You know, I didn't realize how much I needed this either. Spending time with you, talking, it's been nice." Ryan looked at her with appreciation. "Yeah, it really has." He realized how much Linda had done for him over the past few days. She had been his anchor, keeping him grounded when he felt like he was falling apart. "Thank you, Linda," he said sincerely, "for everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "That's what family is for, Ryan." As the evening went on, they continued to talk, sharing memories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. It wasn't how Ryan had expected to spend his night, but somehow it felt exactly right. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe, knowing that no matter what happened, he wasn't facing it alone. The evening stretched on, the warm glow of the living room lamps casting soft shadows around them. The wine in their glasses had gone down steadily, and with each sip, Ryan felt himself loosening up. The tension that had gripped him for days was finally easing, replaced by a quiet calm he hadn't realized he needed. Linda sat beside him on the couch, her presence comforting and familiar. She had been his pillar of support during these difficult days, and as they talked, Ryan realized just how much he had come to appreciate her company. "I don't think I ever told you this," Linda said, swirling the wine in her glass, "but when James and I were expecting Emily, I had so many fears." Ryan looked at her curiously. "Really? You always seem so strong." She chuckled. "That's because years of being a mother force you to be strong. But back then, I was terrified. I kept thinking, what if I mess this up? What if I'm not good enough?" And James, He was the calm one. He always told me, "We'll figure it out together," and you know what? He was right. Ryan nodded, taking in her words. That's exactly how I feel. Like I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have to figure it out. Linda placed a reassuring hand on his, and you will. Emily is lucky to have you, Ryan, and so is that baby. Ryan sighed, rubbing his face. I just wish Emily was here. I hate not being by her side. Linda squeezed his hand gently. She knows you're thinking about her. And soon enough, she'll be home. You just have to hold on a little longer. Ryan exhaled deeply. Yeah, I know. The conversation drifted into silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that came with understanding, two people who had both loved and lost, who had both felt fear and uncertainty. After a moment, Linda leaned back against the couch and sighed. It's been so long since I just sat and talked like this. Life moves so fast. Sometimes I forget to slow down. Ryan glanced at her, noticing a faraway look in her eyes. Do you miss him, James? She smiled sadly. Every single day. Some days are easier, but then there are moments where I catch myself thinking I'll tell him something, only to remember he's gone. Ryan swallowed hard. I can't imagine losing Emily. Linda turned to face him fully. That's because you love her with everything you have, and that's a rare thing, Ryan. Hold on to it. Ryan nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. Linda reached for her wine glass again, but as she did, her fingers brushed against Ryan's hand. It was a small, fleeting touch, but it sent a strange warmth through him. She pulled back slightly, glancing at him, and for a brief moment, there was something in her expression, something vulnerable, something unspoken. Ryan's breath hitched. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the moment felt different, heavier. Linda gave a small, nervous laugh. I think the wine is making me sentimental. Ryan smiled, trying to ease the sudden tension. It's okay. I think we both needed it. She nodded, looking down at her hands. It's been a long time since I've felt this comfortable with someone. Ryan hesitated. You mean since James? Linda nodded. After he passed, I focused on Emily, on being a mother. But now, with her starting her own family, I realize how much time has passed, how much I've ignored myself. Ryan didn't know what to say. He understood loneliness. He had felt it deeply these past few days without Emily. But this was different. Linda had spent years putting others before herself. You deserve to feel happy too, Linda, he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes searching his, and for a split second, it felt like the space between them had disappeared. Then, as if realizing something, she blinked and sat back, exhaling. I should probably get some sleep, she said, forcing a light laugh. It's been a long day. Ryan nodded, sensing the shift. Yeah, that's a good idea. Linda stood up, smoothing her hands over her sweater. Thank you for tonight, Ryan. Talking with you, it really helped. Ryan gave her a small smile. It helped me too. She hesitated for a second as if debating something, then gave him a soft smile before turning toward the guest room. Ryan sat there for a while after she left, staring into the dimly lit room. There had been something in that moment, something unspoken, something he didn't quite understand. But whatever it was, it left his heart beating just a little bit faster. Ryan sat in the quiet living room long after Linda had gone to bed. The air still felt heavy from their conversation, the unspoken emotions lingering between them. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. What was that moment? It had been brief, subtle, but undeniable. Something had passed between them. He shook his head. No, he was just tired, emotionally drained. That was all. Standing up, he grabbed the empty wine glasses and took them to the kitchen. He rinsed them slowly, letting the cool water ground him back to reality. His wife, his pregnant wife, was in the hospital. His priority was her, their baby, their family. Whatever had happened with Linda, it was just a moment of vulnerability, nothing more. And yet, as he lay in bed that night, he found it hard to sleep. The next morning, the atmosphere was different. Not tense exactly, but careful. Linda greeted him with a warm but reserved smile as she poured coffee. Morning, Ryan. Sleep okay? Yeah, he lied, taking a sip of the coffee she handed him. You? She nodded. Better than I expected. They sat at the kitchen table, both knowing there were things left unsaid, but neither willing to bring them up. Instead, they talked about Emily, how she had always been strong, how she would make an incredible mother, how excited she was for the baby. It was safe territory. Ryan clung to it, pushing away the lingering thoughts of the night before. Halfway through breakfast, his phone buzzed. His heart jumped as he saw Emily's name. Emily. Doctor says I can come home today. Ryan let out a breath of relief. She's coming home, he said, his voice lighter than it had been in days. Linda's face brightened instantly. That's wonderful. He quickly typed back. Ryan. I'll be there soon. Can't wait to bring you home. Linda reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. I told you everything would be okay. Ryan smiled. Yeah, you did. Any lingering awkwardness between them seemed to fade. Emily was coming home. That was all that mattered now. The hospital felt colder than he remembered, but as soon as he saw Emily's face, warmth spread through him. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking tired but happy. Hey, beautiful, he murmured as he wrapped his arms around her. She sighed against his chest. I missed you. I missed you more. He pulled back to look at her. How are you feeling? Better now, she said, smiling, and so ready to go home. He helped her gather her things, listening as she told him about the past few days, how the nurses had been sweet, how the baby was doing fine, how she had spent too much time staring at the ceiling, wishing she was back in their own bed. On the drive home, Emily reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. Thank you for holding everything together while I was gone, she said softly. Ryan glanced at her. I didn't do it alone. Your mom helped a lot. Emily smiled. That sounds like her. She always knows how to take care of people. Ryan nodded, gripping the wheel a little tighter. Yeah, she does. When they pulled into the driveway, Linda was already at the door, beaming. Welcome home, sweetheart. Emily hugged her tightly. I missed you, Mom. I missed you too, Linda said, rubbing her back. Now come inside. We have a surprise for you. Emily's eyes widened. A surprise? Ryan exchanged a quick look with Linda before leading Emily to the nursery. When they opened the door, Emily gasped. Oh my God, you finished it? Ryan grinned as she stepped inside, running her hands over the crib, the rocking chair, the carefully arranged baby books. It's perfect, she whispered, turning to Ryan with tears in her eyes. I love it. Linda placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. We wanted you to come home to something special. Emily wiped her eyes and hugged them both. Thank you. This means everything to me. Ryan held her close, feeling a deep sense of relief. This was what mattered. That night, as Ryan lay in bed with Emily curled up beside him, he finally felt at peace. She was home. Their baby was safe, and everything was as it should be. But in the quiet darkness, his mind drifted, just for a second, to the moment he had shared with Linda. It had been fleeting, a passing vulnerability. And it would stay that way. Because this, Emily, their family, was all that truly mattered.